Okay, so it's a pleasure for me to invite today's speaker, Jeff Grupp. And I'm in the chemistry department, so I was inspired by Jeff's work during some research I was doing about atoms, and it was basically I was looking back into Greek times, and typically chemists think of Democritus and atoms, and then I found out about this whole field of atomic theories and is it elitism?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think it was way back, where everything is an illusion by the Greeks. Mm-hmm. And that fascinated me. And then later I found out that, in fact, in Buddhism, there were atomic theories that even started before the Greeks. And this whole area fascinates me because I'm interested in Buddhism. And it came actually also from this book here, which is called The Mechanization of the World Picture, which is a kind of history about basically the role of science and how it played in the modern day world today, which is a very Newtonian world, things unconnected. Whereas quantum mechanics, I think, in terms of more a description of matter where things are all connected. So this talk by Jeff is part also of a larger event tonight, which will be streamed at 6 o'clock, which is called Thinking Atoms, which will have Chuni Lobsang, Jinpa Rinpoche, Roy Ascot, who's here in the audience, and some other people. And I just give a background to Jeff. He is an adjunct professor at Indiana University Northwest, and he's also a PhD student in philosophy at Purdue. And he's interested in Buddhist philosophy, physics, and radical empiricism. He's published 12 articles on the philosophy of time and many attacks on current issues in metaphysics. And today he'll talk about quantum theory of Buddhist atomism. And he is a Buddhist, and his interest in Buddhism arose from a period of hardship in his life from 1992 to 94. And he's been carrying on both his Buddhist practice and his own academic work, which are connected. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to learning something about
Okay, I'll do my best.
Theory.
Yeah, everybody can hear? Okay. Before I start formally, this site I'll have in text form on my website, which is abstractatom.com. I want to say thanks to Jim for initiating my being here. Thanks to Purdue for funding me to come here. Thanks to my wife very much for supporting me on all these projects and for taking great care of our daughter while I'm here for 2.5 days. I'll do my best to go as slow as I can. My students always tell me that I can explain things well, but I always need to make a reminder to go slow, so I'll definitely do that today. I'm not going to cite much at all. I'll make a lot of claims that need citation, but I'm not going to, because most of what I'm doing is based on a lot of my publications, and the citations are there. So I'll just go without worrying about that. And it's important to note that today we're talking about Indian Buddhism, not the Buddhism of Japan, which is so different than the Buddhism of India that some lately don't even consider them part of the same. They're just two different animals completely. For example, there's a book called Pruning the Bodhi Tree, which is quite popular in Buddhist circles, which discusses why the Buddhism of Japan and China, for example, and on one hand, and then the Buddhism of India on the other, should be considered separate fields. which I agree with. It's just an opinion, but I definitely agree with it. And I'm focusing specifically on the Buddhism of India, in a specific time, which I'll tell you about. Okay, so this right here is reality, according to the Buddhist atomism that I'm talking about today. You should remove the idea of the word atom from your mind and start over with today's talk. We're used to thinking of the word atom as how scientists have told us what atoms are, meaning that they're these little composite bodies with, a nucleus and some weird things, cloudy things outside of them. Just forget that completely. That's a very new development. Using the word atom in that way is a new development, started around 1900, but the word atom goes way back, spans many different cultures, and I'll be using the word atom in its traditional sense, where the word atom means basic building block, a partless item that makes up everything. We all know that. We've been told, 6th grade or whatever, that reality is composed of tiny building blocks. These building blocks make up everything, and they are sometimes we're told that they're partless, such as, for example, with an electron. I'm using the word atom in that sense. So for today's talk, an atom is an electron, not an atom is not a constituent, or doesn't have a constituent that is an electron. So a quark, an atom, anything that's partless and therefore irreducible is responsible for being a basic piece of ultimate reality. That's what we mean by atom. So again, that's our picture right there. You'll see in a moment the significance of why I have this film that I've made up here. Okay, so Buddhism is unlike any other philosophy or religion. I'm in fact not sure why it's called either a philosophy or religion. In today's talk, you'll see that Buddhism is an empirical study, and I'll just equate it with quantum physics. And therefore, Buddhism is a scientific pursuit, not primarily a philosophic or religious one. Okay, we've all been told that reality is composed of basic building blocks, the ones I just talked about. Tiny items that are so small that we can't see them. So, for example, if I cut up this lectern here, I can cut the pieces up so they become so small that pretty quick the pieces, you can deduce that the pieces of the electron are so small that you can't see them. So the electron is made up of items that are invisible to your naked eye. Okay, so you can keep cutting and cutting and cutting. And, then you ask the question, can we keep cutting forever? Or is there an ultimate piece that can't be cut anymore? If the answer is that there's an ultimate piece, that means that, for example, this lectern or anything else is composed of an ultimate basic building block. Okay, so the group of scientists that are responsible for studying these are called quantum physicists. You should not be intimidated by that phrase. It's just a label referred to the people that study basic building blocks. Okay, it's a very simple idea. Don't let terms scare you. But you may be surprised if I tell you that these were not first discovered by quantum physicists. As far as I can tell from my analysis of the history of culture and philosophy and so forth, it appears that a group of Buddhists in India around 400, 500, 600, 700 AD were responsible for first discovering quantum reality. So let me give you a quote here from a very famous Buddhist scholar. I think his name's pronounced different ways depending on who you're talking to, but Sherbatsky. He is a very famous European, and he's very famous in Europe and Russia and America, but also India, for his work in outlining what's called pre-classical Buddhism. And here's a quote that he gives us from his famous works called Buddhist Logic. The Buddhists denied the existence of substantial matter altogether. Movement consists for them of moments. It is a staccato movement, momentary flashes of a stream of energy. Everything is evanescent, says the Buddhist, because there is no stuff. That's from, I said I wouldn't cite, but here you go. His book, Buddhist Logic, Volume 1, 1962, page 19. So the point here then is, how many of you think this is moving? Doesn't it seem to be going like this? There is no motion in that film right there. What is happening is you have pieces of light, on the film screen coming in and out of existence on the film screen, which gives the illusion of motion. Here's another example. Okay, here the film starts. See how every moment is still, 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 and then bam. So the first moments you can tell, the first set of frames you can tell are still. The later moments that start right now are the same moments, just sped up. So you can see in this film right here, where there is stillness, now you can see stillness, but then eventually you'll have the illusion of motion right there. Okay, so that is what is being discussed in this quote that I just read. That is, for the Buddhist, all of reality. And I will argue, probably not in much detail today, but and elsewhere I have that's what quantum reality is all about also. Okay, so in Strabatsky's quote, several issues are of interest. There is no matter, there is no persistence, no continuation of anything through time, and reality is energy. And also, if I would have continued the quote, we would know that reality is atomic, composed of the basic building blocks that I just mentioned. We will see today that this is in stark agreement with what quantum physicists have discovered, and for that reason, Buddhism and Buddhist atomism may be scientific, therefore not metaphysical pursuits as are often labeled in American culture at least. If so, most interestingly of all, nirvana, which is the direct experience of quantum reality. Yes, I did say that right. That will surprise some people. Nirvana is not a philosophy primarily, but a science, an empirical study. For that reason, I won't use the word nirvana today. I'll use the phrase nirvanic empiricism. I'll talk about nirvanic observers being in a state of nirvanic empiricism, for example. Quantum reality, again, for those of you who aren't familiar, that again is the ultimate fundamental level of everything. Where these atoms, basic building blocks, well, I'll call them Buddhist atoms here in a second, they make up everything, and when we refer to quantum reality, we just mean that domain of nature. So, if you could cut apart the lectern enough, you'd run into these things eventually. Quantum reality can be experienced indirectly by physicists in the lab, as we all know. Okay? But little known in Western culture, there's another way to experience quantum reality, and that is through Buddhist meditation, often called mindfulness. There's many names, many different variations of Buddhist meditation. But the experience of quantum reality is only fully nirvanic. It is only fully nirvanic empiricism in Buddhist mindfulness meditation. So, calling this empirical probably will make some people scratch their heads. But I use the word empirical, not necessarily in the way that is largely used in our culture. In our culture, the word empirical typically means experience of something outside oneself. So the blackness of the screen here is empirical to me. It is outside me, and I apprehend it with my senses. But if I close my eyes and imagine it now, I'm told by most empiricists in philosophy today that's not empirical. I find that odd. I find that odd for two reasons. First of all, because I'm not just thinking about the same wall that I was just looking at a second ago. So why can't I call that empirical experience? Just because it derives only from my mind seems that I should call it empirical. And another reason that it's strange is because if I look at the wall here, or look at the blackness on the screen, all that's going on in the traditional scientific picture is the light enters my eyes and triggers my nervous system to create a map inside me of reality. So we go throughout our lives looking at reality by constructing maps of reality in our minds. So really, in a sense, everything is inner. All of our experience of reality is just trapped and wound up in our own consciousness. This has been avoided in Western philosophy for a long time, except for a few philosophers such as William James and his philosophy of radical empiricism, where you take as being empirical anything that appears in consciousness. Whether you close your eyes and imagine a blue dragon, or open your eyes and look at the blackness on the screen there, both are just pieces of experience, so both are just considered empirical. Okay, so there's a lot more I could say about that, but I think I'm just going to keep going because I want to make sure I do what I need to do here today. Okay, so we will study, I'm going to hereafter refer to the quantum reality and the basic building blocks that I'm referring to as Buddhist atoms or as abstract atoms. I'm just going to use those interchangeably, and you'll see why here pretty quick. And we need to thoroughly explore that to get a handle on what the point is of all this discussion of Buddhist atomism. And you'll see that this leads to enormous implications for all of our lives, especially, believe it or not, for our social lives and how we live together as people. Buddhist atomism leads to social activism, in addition to things like nirvanic empiricism and so forth. So I'll cover as much as I've got a lot of time, so great. I'll cover as much as I can. Okay, Buddhist atomism is reductionistic. That means that if I hold up a pen, the pen really, in a sense, doesn't exist. What exists are atoms, whether you can see them or not. The Buddhist atoms that I'm talking about, the ultimate constituents of reality. The fact that you can't see them is a problem with you, not with the pen. It's a problem with your perception being not crude enough to see reality as reality really is. And if you doubt this position, all you need to do is consult the quantum physicists, and they will tell you, well, yes, it is, if we do tear apart this pen enough, we will find something that sounds a lot like the Buddhist atomisms that Jeff is here talking about. So we have this dilemma, as we'll see in a moment, because the pen and the atoms that allegedly make it up, there's some conflicts between the two. It's not clear how they both can coexist. In other words, it's not clear how the atoms can make up the pen, how the Buddhist atoms can make up the pen. Okay, now our traditional picture of, here we go. Traditional picture of that we're given in philosophy, so anywhere in really in Western thought, is something like this. I just made this. I couldn't find the diagram I really wanted that I made before, so I just whipped this out, so sorry for the crudeness. We're told that there are the basic building blocks that I've told you about, which I'm calling Buddhist atoms, so electrons, quarks, and so forth. This leads to the overall field of physics, where physics leads to chemistry, chemistry leads to biology, and then out of biology emerge other things like economics, minds, societies, planets, galaxies, whatever you want to think. And chemistry also, can give rise to its own. I forgot to put another arrow over there, where this can give rise to what are called middle order solids, or middle order items, like a pen or a planet, or so forth and so forth. That's the way philosophers refer to them. However, here's what Buddhist atomism does. It goes like this. It cuts that right there. That is what I mean by reductionism. Okay, it's not clear what the connection is from here to here. The ultimate Buddhist atomic building blocks, it's not clear how they are building blocks, how they build anything. And in fact, as we'll see, what the Buddhist does in the era that I'm going to discuss in a minute is maintains that these here are largely constructions of consciousness. And this is what really exists. Those are the ultimate and real items. So if you see reality and it looks like this, you're dreaming. But if you see reality and it looks like that, you're seeing something real. That would be the picture of reality according to Buddhist atomism. Okay, so Now, to understand all this, so that's basically a quick and easy way to describe reductionism. So it's important to understand, though, that in Buddhist philosophy that I'm referring to, we can consider reality as having we can look at reality from two different ways. Reality, to put it crudely, has two different divisions. Okay? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. There's a division here which I'm going to call Div 2, short for Division 2. And that is ordinary empirical mental experience. In other words, all this stuff up here. Everything from here up, where physics does not include the true Buddhist atoms, electrons, and so forth. Because those are, as far as I know, not empirical. They're indirectly empirical. Nobody's ever seen a quark, seen an electron, except people that are familiar with Buddhist mindfulness meditation. Okay, so when a physicist sees a Buddhist atom in the lab, they are seeing the computer's representation of what the computer interprets is going on in the lab. Okay, so actually I have another film of that also. Can't believe I forgot. Here's another film of Buddhist atomism, but I don't think that I need to worry about that one. Let me, sorry, I forgot about this one. Here's, as far as I understand, there you go. That's what physicists see. One example in the lab. Flashes of light. Largely motionless. And there's a lot that physicists have to do to interpret exactly what is going on, if these are particles and so forth, seen in the accelerator experimentation that they do in their labs. So, maybe I want to get back to that other film. Yeah, here we go. In case I need it later. Okay, so we're saying then that consciousness constructs biology. This moment here is largely constructed by consciousness. I'll argue this point as I have elsewhere, but we'll argue this in some mild form here today. So the other division of reality, I'm going to call Div 1, short for Division 1, is just the Buddhist atoms, which are immaterial. That could surprise some people that I put that up there. Point particles. So I'm adding some things to the idea of Buddhist atomism here that I haven't brought up yet. The Buddhist atoms are non-physical. Immaterial is a better word. And they are points. A point means it doesn't have any size. If something is point size, it has no size. Yeah?
This is like a sort of string theory.
Strings do have a one-dimensional or two-dimensional size in string theory. Yeah, I've actually argued in an article coming out later this year in a journal called Axiomathes that string theory, to have these irreducible strings, there's some problems that need to be sorted out with that, as I think string theorists will admit. But the point particle, now a string doesn't have, as far as I know, doesn't have a surface, because it's a one-dimensional line. So a one-dimensional line doesn't have any thickness. If you look at it from the side, or look at its end cap, and so you can't see anything, but it does have size. So no surface, but it has a size. So this would be different, though. This is just not even one-dimensional. This is zero-dimensional point. And this is, like I've said, this is not, I'm not just giving you great sounding opinions from the 700 AD today. This is stuff that's thoroughly argued for elsewhere. Sorry?
It's like quantum, like electrodynamics.
Yep. It's exactly like quantum chromodynamics, quantum electro. You know, when you've got, you don't have continuous fields stretching between particles. You've got particle exchanges of point particles. So unconnected, unattached streams of particles. That's fundamental to why Buddhist atomism and quantum reality are indistinguishable. And you mentioned the word in the introduction, things are connected. I've got something to say about that also, because I just said unattached, but I'll clarify about that in a little bit. Okay, so one thing that I'm not going to go into today, well, the reason why is because nobody really understands this. These are two ways of looking at one thing. Okay, if you look at an elephant, to use something that's often, an example that's often used in India. If you look at an elephant, if blindfolded men look at an elephant, touch an elephant, one will touch the trunk and another will touch the leg, and they're describing the same thing in vastly different ways. That's essentially what's going on right here. These two, really there's only one realm, but as far as I know, no Buddhist has ever figured out, no quantum physicist has ever figured out how these two realms can be identical. This is like, to say that means the following. It means that you are identical to all Buddhist atoms that construct reality now. And if you don't know it, that's fine. That's just your problem. It doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that you don't see this. And if you just merely practiced mindfulness meditation, perhaps you would. As far as I understand, though, how these can be identical is a mystery. It's actually something I'm working on right now in other research. So I won't go into that in detail, but you should remember that. I'm going to discuss these as separate all throughout, whatever time we have left. But you should remember that really they're not separate. I'm just discussing them separately because we don't have like the grand unified theory of quantum Buddhism, which is needed. That theory would be to explain thoroughly number 2, which is what I'm going to do, I hope, in an article next year, which is nearing completion, and then show how 2 is 1. So in other words, to show how division 1 is div 2. Okay.
Is that a mirror of this, the complementarity of the physicists?
Yeah, but complementarity makes me very nervous. I mean, I love Niels Bohr. He's my favorite physicist. But complementarity is not something that I've wanted to draw into my work at all, just because the theory in itself makes me too nervous. I've taken all kinds of other aspects of Bohr's work into publications of mine, especially his sort of positivistic interpretation of quantum physics, but not complementarity. But yeah, there are similarities, definitely. Okay. So I'm glad I have all these diagrams because it's better than reading all this. Okay, so I can sum up, those of you who are lost or would like a recap, this diagram here not only can sum everything up for us that I've just said, so far that is, but it also can can sort of be a jumping point to everything that really gets interesting about this. So division 1, what it says, what makes up what we see is, well, that's fine. That's no big deal. I'll just leave it there. So division 1 is composed, this is the Buddhist atoms. Division 2 are, we would usually say, empirical reality, planets and animals and so forth. But from what I've just said, the Buddhist position is this is all the constructions of consciousness. Empirical reality is a construction of consciousness. So it's interesting to note, watch how, so we're labeling here, division 1, what it's like, and division 2, what it's like. Notice the properties. Division 1 is composed of invisible items. Look at here. Visible items can be perceived via sense organs. Division 1 is composed of immaterial items, and I'll explain why soon. Division 2 is the domain of the material. This right here we call this material stuff. It's just the name we've given to it. So division 1 Buddhist atoms are partless. Everything in this domain has a part, is composite, or is a mereological item, is the technical word philosophers use for it. Over here, items are surfaceless. Here, they have surfaces. Here, the Buddhist atoms are timeless, or very nearly timeless. Actually, timeless is the word I'm going to stick with today. Over here, items we believe exist in time. They persist. Over here, items are uncaused. One of the key, just revolutionary discoveries of quantum physics, which was known to the Buddhists well, at least some of the Buddhists, way back. Actually, my article called Our Theory of Time that I published last year, the whole point of that article is to show that the only correct interpretation of Buddhist atomism is to show that Buddhist atoms are utterly uncaused. Just very similar to the way in quantum particle dynamics, there is probabilistic causation, which I just translate as being randomness, or a non-causality. Anyway, so over here, the Buddhist atoms are motionless. These all go together. If something is timeless, you can't move through time, so it's motionless. Over here, items are caused to exist and have motion. Over here, Buddhist atoms don't touch each other. Over here, these items touch. These atoms touch here because they have surfaces. Surfaceless items don't have anything by which to touch each other by, since we need surfaces to touch. So there's no touching over here, which gets to your connectedness point, which we'll get to. And typically, the Buddhist atoms are believed, electrons and so forth, are believed to compose this stuff. Okay, so now here's the point. There are some problems here. You should notice. How exactly is an immaterial reality? If this is the case, if the level of the basic building blocks, quantum Buddhist atoms, compose everything, that's like saying that immaterial stuff composes material stuff. How does that work? That seems to be a problem. Oh, but it gets worse. Let's just interpret the diagram here. Here's what I've got written for you to interpret. This is what we are asked to believe by any physicist, philosopher, anybody who wants to tell us that the reality that we see is largely as we see it, and it is composed of a quantum reality. Then this is what follows. Then we say back to him or her, then you live in a causal world that is composed of non-causal items. That doesn't sound too kosher. You live in a world of surfaces and colors. Look around you, all you see are surfaces and colors. Every single experience about your outer world can be reduced to surfaces and colors, even things like heat and sound and so forth. That's another issue, though, which I've discussed elsewhere. So the world of surfaces and colors that you find yourself in is composed of a world that is colorless and surfaceless. That's a huge problem. Does anybody know how long that's been known? This is not me just discussing. Pardon? This is Zeno, one of Zeno's paradoxes. The measure paradox. What was Zeno? 450, 550? He's way back in the BCs in Greece. Here's what the mathematical equation would look like. If surfaceless things compose surfaces, this is what the mathematical equation would look like. So S equals surface. So no surface. All of you have had third grade math, so this should be a pretty easy equation. Zero surface plus zero surface plus zero surface plus zero surface equals a greater than zero surface. That seems to be a mathematical disaster. How can a bunch of zeros all of a sudden lead us to non-zero? There's only one philosopher I know of who's ever had a serious attempt to try to show us how this can be. His name is Adolf Grunbaum, still works at the University of Pittsburgh, and in some famous papers in 1952, 1956, and so forth, he allegedly solved this and showed that miraculously this isn't a problem. However, in 4 publications of mine from 2003 to 2005, and one coming out later this year, I've shown that his solution apparently does not work, which should not be a surprise, because we all know that this would appear to be a simple equation. Okay, if you study binary mathematics, maybe there's some loopholes, but then again, it seems our trust in this equation being an absurdity. This equal sign right here needs to go away. There is no equal sign. So that's what the diagram results. And that's what, so there's a problem. Let me just keep going with this and then we'll keep moving here. So also other things that the diagram shows are you live in a material world that is composed of immaterial items, as I've seen. You live in a visible world composed of invisible items. You live in a world of persisting items that are composed of momentary and truly fleeting, non-persisting items. And so this last point is kind of like this. If you look at a lion, just use an example from an article I have coming out. If you look at a lion from a distance, so you can't see its, the little fine pieces of its fur and so forth. So the back of the lion is going to look like a gold smooth piece of lion. So just imagine that lion, sitting in the zoo or Africa or whatever, and you're not going to see the lion flipping in and out of existence. It's going to appear to you that smooth patch of golden fur just continues to exist through time. So you see it now, and then at another moment, and so forth. So what's the problem? It just persists through time. The problem is that the reality that makes up the lion does not persist through time. It persists through, if the Buddhist atoms that make it up, allegedly make it up, have any persistence at all, it's going to be, trillionths of a second or less. So there is a huge problem with how our sense experience matches up with Buddhist atomism and quantum reality. Okay, so let me continue on here then. Yes. I'm told a lot of people are hearing us now, so.
Okay, I was just wondering, the 5 points that you had there, I
Sure.
have a pretty good grasp on what they all
Okay.
mean, but the use of the term material throws me off a bit. I mean, even if
great.
they are fundamental, basic building blocks, to say that something at that point is immaterial,
Right, okay.
what is the description?
I'm going to cover that,
definition
but
of material?
I'm going to do that right now. If you just go and look, it's merely a definition issue, a word issue, semantic issue. If you go and look at the history of the definition of matter, matter is defined in the following ways. Just start describing the wall. It's got a surface, in other words, an extension. It is stable. It's not flipping in and out of existence. It is colorful. It has a location in space. It's solid, and so forth. Though if that's what matter is, then there's a problem, because this stuff doesn't have any of those qualities. It has the opposite. So if matter is solid, stable, extended, located in space, it persists through time, if something has the inverse of all those properties, I have to call it non-matter. You see what I mean?
So I have another question then. Would you define the materialistic point of view? In other words, if I looked at that materialistically, what would that mean?
There's no... the only reason I call this immaterial, and this is not my choice. This is a movement that some physicists and philosophers are onto, to say that subatomic particles, Buddhist atoms, we don't see how they're material items. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They have the inverse properties of the material items, so how can we call them material? If there's an apple sitting over there, and it's red and round and tastes like an apple, those are three properties. If an orange is sitting next to it, and it's orange, and has a different roundness and doesn't taste apple-like, I can't call it an apple. Its properties being different mean I have to call it a different thing. So if something has all the properties that matter doesn't have, I don't know how I have to call it non-matter. That would seem to be the definition of immaterial.
Well, what would you think of suggesting that is immaterial which has no substrate?
You mean in the philosophic sense of Aristotle and so forth?
I don't know about Aristotle. I was meaning in the physical sense that what we would associate with being material would be that it is upon something, within something. It has a substrate.
Yeah,
but you're suggesting that, I think, that this has no substrate.
When you use the word substrate, that has a specific, I think that you're using it the same way as I'm thinking of. That's a specific meaning to philosophers, meaning that there is, behind the properties, is a property holder.
Something that reveals the properties.
Yeah. That is, Buddhist atomism is part of a tradition across the world. It goes from anywhere from William James to the logical positivists to the philosopher Quine, all over the place, where we reject substrate because of its metaphysicality. What that means, what I mean by that is we have no evidence that substrate exists. It just seems to be that we come into the world, a world of properties, whiteness, solid, so forth. And therefore, the way we think makes us say, okay, if there's a property of something, then there has to be a something that we don't see, an invisible something. That's the substrate. It's often called a bare particular, a thin particular. There's all kinds of names philosophers, metaphysicians have. The philosophers who study metaphysics have for these. But I'm part of a tradition that rejects this, and I don't reject this just by choice. I published several articles that are savage attacks against the philosophy of property possession. The best one is the one that's coming out later this year in the journal called Sorites, called Blob Theory. So to sum up, to answer your question in a real quick summary, there's two reasons. We have no evidence that substrate exists, but let's just say, who cares? Let's just theorize that it does. There's this stuff behind the properties that holds the properties. If you start to try to describe it, you run straight into what philosophers often call it is a train wreck.
How about just using difference then?
Difference?
Yeah.
Difference is exactly...
Where there's no difference, there's
no
immateriality.
Say again?
Where there is no difference, there is what we would call immateriality.
Oh, well, there is no difference, there is immateriality. You would have to then explain how... what you have as being not difference, do you have in mind it persists through time? For example? I mean, the point I'm trying to get is as soon as you try to describe it as existing through time, for example, or entering into causal relations if it does, or being eternal, I could show you if we had time that it leads to big problems. In other words, the descriptions lead to absurdity. And that's not just my opinion, again, this is what I've shown elsewhere in anything I've written.
I'm just thinking, one thing, I was talking to several people with the string theory, which, it just kind of interests me on the side, but as far as I understand with the strings, there is no connection between the strings. So if we took ultimately, let's take that picture. So there is no connection between the strings. And there may be, I don't know about temporal evolution, if there's a connection. So if we think that there's no connection, which is this picture, I guess, which is interesting because I mentioned connection at the beginning, which I think quantum, connection, but at the other level, no connection. So no connection is pretty good because in that sense, the surface is a manifestation and an assumption of connection.
Actually, that's something I'm going to go into here in a second. But just to give you a hint, the idea of connection is really sort of, in the Buddhist tradition I'm thinking of, is sort of replaced by the concept of indistinguishability. Any Buddhist atom is indistinguishable from any other. So if you see one here and one there, they're indistinguishable. Of course, Pardon? I forgot what that is.
Well, they can't adopt exactly the same set of quantum numbers. Energy level, quantum numbers. So
yeah, that would be rejected in Buddhist atomism. Just as we also have, as far as I can tell, there's confusion in quantum physics about exactly what to do about electrons. They seem to be more or less identical, except for certain issues like as location, for example. But location depends on the existence of space, which is invisible. There's not a person in here that's ever seen space. So, you know, it's
I don't know what an electron is ultimately, though.
right. Yeah, our best theory for what these things are is Buddhist atomism. But yeah, as far as the Pauli exclusion principle, yeah, something like that would be rejected. There is, I mean, these two statements would both be true in Buddhist atomism. There's only one atom, and there are infinite instances of atoms which are all indistinguishable. So both of those would be. So the real mystery in Buddhist atomism is if there's this sea of Buddhist atoms, what do they do, and how can they give rise to the appearance of the reality we see? Which I've made some preliminary work on that, but that's what I'm working on right now. Anybody else? Yeah.
You use the example of quarks and electrons as being examples of Buddhist atoms.
Yeah. Right.
But an electron has mass, so wouldn't the fact that it has mass, some measurable mass that physicists, scientists can measure, imply?
Well, that it has mass is okay.
But in terms of it being related to having some material, it could be semantics again. I'm just tripping on this semantic argument of this.
No, it's a great question.
Immateriality. Like if something has mass or can generate momentum, for example.
As far as, okay, let me explain this. This is a really good question. You're making me think of several things here. First of all, I'm saying that the Buddhist atoms are electrons and quarks and so forth. That is not proven. If we find a quark has a part, then what that means is that the Buddhists, a Buddhist atomist like myself would just change their mind and say, well, nope. Well, I mean, that may sound funny, but that's, of course, the virtue of scientific thought is that the pursuit is to change your mind, not to have stagnant, thoughts through. The whole idea is to overturn your own theory. Progress. So that's one thing. A second thing is, though, as far as electron having mass, great. That's a great point. I know that intro physics students are told, the electron has mass and it has a little radius. Virtually almost everything I've said here is contradicted in like your intro physics book. That's not my problem. That's the problem of the intro physics professors. They are not describing particles correctly. They're describing particles in a way that's not going to throw everybody into philosophic discussion, so you can just train the engineers to know about the basics of physics. But as far as an electron having mass, to me that question makes only so much sense. I mean, is mass just a kind of movement? Is mass just the interaction an electron has with the Higgs particle? Or is mass just some sort of property that is intrinsic to what an electron is? If it's... to be honest, I reject all three of those. And I say that the mass... this is not... I'm not saying this because it's fun to give my opinion. This is something I've thoroughly argued elsewhere. What mass is our human way of constructing ideas about what structureless Buddhist atoms are. So we see it, through our computer or through Buddhist meditation. And we describe it in certain ways with language, but language always misses the mark. As soon as you, like Zen masters often say, as soon as you say something, you're wrong. Well, it's a very famous Buddhist maxim. That would be the best way I could say here. So if you, like for example, if you said, flashing piece of light, that's as close as we can get to a description, but ultimately Buddhist atoms are ineffable, beyond language. And that's actually the focus of the article I mentioned earlier that I've got coming out later. All my work is summed up in one article coming out, two, but really one article coming out later this year in Axiomath. It's called Mereological Nihilism. So I discussed that thoroughly. If there's something that is described in terms of language, it leads to contradiction. The only things that exist are those which are ineffable and only can be experienced through feeling, which is exactly what Buddhists have been saying for centuries. So, just to bring up, what I think is a great example, why didn't, in Star Wars movies, of course, Lucas was onto a lot of this kind of stuff when he made the Star Wars movies, why didn't he say, we have all these quotes of Yoda saying, feel the Force, Ben saying to Luke, feel the Force. Why didn't they say, think about the Force? Or, talk about the Force? Because it's only known through feeling.
That feeling
Exactly. It's not a brain activity. It's not a nervous system activity. Nervous systems don't exist, according to Buddhist atomism. None of this stuff, the reality you see is somehow or another, it's either completely, your senses are either completely wrong or they're way off track in some way. I'm not saying that you don't exist right there. That's not what I'm saying. But it very well could be the case that that's true.
The flashing of unconnected, flashes of energy, unconnected. So is that feeling coherent?
Yes. I'm actually going, that actually is the next topic here. Let me give you a quote from the article I've mentioned now several times. Very excited about this article coming out. I've been working on it since 1999. Here's basically what I say in the aforementioned article. We've all been told that reality is coherent. That the empirical reality is explainable in terms of coherent science, and if we find a problem, the problem's with us. Okay? I think there's even an X-Files quote, one of my favorite shows, where Scully says to Mulder, she says, science is not in contradiction, it's humans' mistaken thoughts that are in contradiction about science. Buddhist atomism says this, nothing could be further from the truth. That empirical reality, which we're calling Div 2, all this stuff up here, glad I drew this diagram, all this stuff up here is describable by contradiction only and is all only given in terms of absurdity. So postmodernists are going to be very happy with Buddhist atomism. I've had postmodernists tell me that they are very fond of this theory. So great. But it's, of course, a scientific, has a scientific basis for it, but I do like that postmodernists have jumped on the bandwagon a little bit. Only a few that have emailed me. So division 1 is describable in terms of non-contradiction, if it's describable at all, because it's really technically ineffable. But if you try to construct a definition of it, very minimal description of it, it's going to be consistent. Now, you should notice something. What I just said is a completely opposite of what is typically mentioned by scientists everywhere. What do scientists tell you about waves and particles, about uncertainties, and so forth? We are told by scientists everywhere that quantum reality involves paradox. Wave-particle duality. Who's heard of wave-particle duality? Okay, well, good. It's unlike my classes where one person raises their hand. Wave-particle duality, I argue in the article coming out, doesn't exist. There is no wave. There is a movement in physics that's been generated by some loudmouth physicists. Feynman, a great example. Richard Feynman. He bitterly hated philosophers. If you doubt it, just go read anything he's written, and it'll, a couple sentences in, he'll start ripping on philosophers. He and others have been largely responsible for telling us, without argument, that all of a sudden, reality just has all these paradoxes, and they're irreducible, and we can't go into them, we can't explore them. And oh, by the way, Professor Feynman, when he was still alive, would tell us, or would demonstrate for us, if you question me on that, if you challenge my assertion, unargued for assertion, that this reality involves irreducible paradox, I'm going to laugh at you, mock you, and I'm going to use my platform as a famous physicist and announce to the whole world that you philosophers are idiots. Okay? This is very mysterious for tons of reasons. One thing is that in all these other areas of science, that philosophy doesn't exist. The philosophy, which I just said is wrong, but the assumption is made that reality is coherent. So why all of a sudden here do a couple of physicists tell us that reality is incoherent? It's a political scandal, is what it is. The only reason we have the paradoxes of quantum reality, wave-particle duality, stretched out smeared electrons through uncertainty, is due to metaphysics. Metaphysics is, you can define as non-scientific theorization about invisible things, things that are beyond our experience. When you have a metaphysics where you describe things beyond your experience, you can say anything you want. You can say, God is a man in the sky. I can't see him, and neither can you, except through very special circumstances, but he's there. and if you don't believe me, I could cut off your hands or start war or something. Of course, I'm referring to history, partially. Some things going on in Iraq make this, anyway, we'll get to that later. So this is very mysterious. If you want more information about what I've just said about how the quantum paradoxes, the summary is the quantum paradoxes only derive through physicists, just a few, but actually a few famous ones, inserting metaphysics, non-scientific information, into their theories and just coming up with these paradoxes. All physicists see are particles. The only empirical thing that they get in their research looks like, where's that film? Well, it's the one I showed you a little while ago, where the lines were going like this. The idea that there are probability waves, probability clouds. Nobody's ever seen these. Yes, computers will generate a probability cloud, but that's through doing, that's the computer's representation of generating particle activities over time. Anyway, you'll have to read my other publications coming out later to see exactly why. So I'm saying that the few physicists that have spread through the whole community of physics that quantum reality involves paradox is incorrect, and that these are actually discovered by the Buddhists and don't involve paradox at all. They're the only consistent things that exist. And all these are describable by contradiction. Now that needs to be backed up. I need to give an example. So let's do that. Because to say that anthropology, talking about societies, or sociology or economics, or biochemistry, or inorganic chemistry, or superconductor physics, all these are ultimately described in terms of absurdity, needs to be backed up. So let me do that. Just quickly, if you want better description for why, just read anything I've written. But let me give you one quick example. Reality, Division 2, Div 2 reality, here up, can be described in very simple terms. Everything has a surface. Even things like clouds or so forth. You're going to see a cloud. You're going to see this white wall, semi-transparent white wall. So it's going to appear to you as a surface. That's the important thing. We're concerned with experience here, not experience is the basis of science, is the basis of Buddhist atomism. So everything here has the things that I mentioned before about materiality, materialism. Everything has a location. Everything has a surface. Most things are solid, and so forth. Things move and persist through time. Let's just take one of those primary attributes. If we can show that these are absurd, then that means that we can show that anything in reality from here up is absurd. So let me just take motion. Well, I didn't choose that by accident. It's the one I happened to just quickly print off my computer before I flew out of Indiana yesterday. So here we go. Let me just read what I have for you. I could do this for any example that you want, causation, time, anything, but movement is one that I just got done going over in my logic class at Indiana U Northwest with students, and they seem to like the description, so here we go. So imagine that the room you're sitting in here is pitch black, and I shoot a glowing bullet through it. What do any of you see? What will you see? You see a line from, if the gun's right here, it'll start here and it'll end, at the wall over there as it goes through the wall. Okay, now, does the line exist or not? No. The line exists in the mind, but the line is a construction of consciousness. Why? Because your senses are too crude to pick up the bullet's moment-to-moment positioning. I just said, just let me use the word positioning here since we're talking about Division 2 reality. Okay, so now that's interesting. So you're seeing something empirical in the Division 2 reality that doesn't exist. That's a model for, this isn't the point here, but I can just say this in passing. That would be held for everything in here, according to Buddhist atomists. Now when I say it doesn't exist, it's not clear how strong that should be taken. Does that mean truly doesn't exist, or is just half real or semi-real? That's a big debate that's been going on in India for a long time. Read Richard Dreyfuss's book, Recognizing Reality. for truly great discussion on that. So you see a line, but really the bullet is the same old bullet as it crosses the room. Now, imagine this. If you take it here, so here's where we get to showing how reality is paradox for Division 2, anything from physics up. If you have a camera, a super fast camera, that can take pictures of the bullet as it goes across the room, say the fastest camera there is, what's it going to film? It's going to film still states, okay? Or at least what appear to be almost still states. You're not going to see any blurring in that bullet. So the camera, if it takes 100 pictures from here to the other side of the room, it's going to be bullet, 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 bullet. So if you're sitting here watching the bullet fire, and the camera here is, quote, watching, unquote, the bullet fire, you see two completely different realities. The camera sees a different reality than you. You see a line, it doesn't see a line. Okay? Now, what's most interesting about this is it appears that the best way to describe, I'm using an approximate description just so we can get the point across quickly. The best way to describe what the bullet, or the camera sees, is a set of still states from one side of the bullet, from one side of the room to the other. Now, what does that mean? That means that motion is constructed out of stillness. Now, that should sound a lot like some of this stuff here. All these, maybe I didn't put it there, but I could have put motion comes from stillness. Would be another problem. So, now if you had the fastest camera there is, it would take pictures that would be so close to being still that you could just call them, in the Division 2 perspective, as being still. Now, the Division 1 perspective involves things like Heisenberg's uncertainty, so that's a different issue. But we're talking about Division 2 here, from here up. And so you can see that if you describe motion, just start to describe anything that moves. You're describing something that is not moving. So you're describing something that's moving, but is composed of states that are not moving. So if each state of something is not moving, it would seem to be a paradox to say that the unmoving states give rise to motion. What actually seems to be a better description is to say there's a state that's still, state that's still, 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 still. Your mind perceives them all at once because your mind's not fast enough to see all the stillness, and therefore constructs the idea of motion. So the concept of motion, one of the most basic principles we have of matter, can be described as being absurd because it's composed of unmotion.
But I mean, if you take Bergson's point about duration, what he's saying is that movement and time are subjective readings of a situation. They depend on memory. But that doesn't contradict any of these other matters. It's simply talking...
No, that's in line with what everything I've said. There's a lot of similarity between Bergson, Bergson and like his book Matter and Memory, with what's being said here. Now, not full alignment, but he is definitely more in line with this than he is not in line with this. That's for sure. I mean, a lot of the Western philosophers, Kant, Hume, have huge similarities to some of this, and it's some writers who I've cited have said it seems kind of ironic that at the time in Europe when Indian Buddhism came into the culture, after the book publishing was flourished through Europe, it's kind of ironic that all of a sudden medieval philosophy changed and you have philosophers like Kant showing up. His transcendental idealism is enormously Buddhistic. In fact, the author I quoted to you at the very beginning of this talk, Sherbatsky, is called a neo-Kantian Buddhist. It means a new Kantian Buddhist. And of course, Hume's theory of causation, sounds exactly like what the Buddhists were saying. So the point is, though, it seems like this is very controversial to some, not me. Western philosophers may have ripped off Indian Buddhists, but that tradition has been forgotten by contemporary philosophers. Hang on, did you, I think I cut you off, something I'm good at doing. Did your question have any more?
I was really pointing up that there isn't any sort of contradiction. I mean, on the one hand, you're talking about subjective experience, and on the other hand, you're talking about some idealized position outside of the subjective view.
Oh, no. The positioning of the bullet is always consciousness. Okay, if I see your point, you're saying you're describing states of consciousness, but you're talking about the bullet being outside. Which one are we talking about here? That is actually, if that gets confusing, which it should, that's actually not my problem. The problem with that is that all of us have developed as humans to believe there's this reality outside of us. It's objective, hardly ever questioned. It's amazing how little it's questioned. And to say that if I come along and say, oh, it's just construction of consciousness, if I say something like position, motion, momentum, whatever, I'm referring to states of consciousness. So in my example of the bullet I just gave, to most properly describe that, I would say, your conscious generation of an empirical reality of a bullet is an absurdity. That would be the best way to put it. Does that make sense? That went well.
It does until you're in the line of the bullet, and then reality falls into place.
Oh, well, sure.
Very suddenly.
Well, what the Buddhists would say, what's the difference? It's just more an empirical conscious generation. I'm not saying that you construct reality in a way that it's paranormal where you choose it. That's not the point here. The point here is, I mean, that could be, but I would not have the expertise to comment on that. The point is that our best theorization of these is just to say they are, more than anything, constructions of consciousness. Now, do they come from this? That is very unknown if they do. I mean, maybe that's the dream. We can show that. But we're very far from doing that. Yeah? Oh, yeah, the mic, right.
I guess I just have a problem with the motion of the bullet here.
Okay.
So you're saying you just see the bullet still you can take millions of snapshots from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the difference between point and B, it has moved in time and space to a different point. So to me, there still is motion, regardless of whether it's still this particular point.
You're saying if you had, let's say we had a camera that could take infinite snapshots. So literally every position, which is a conscious construction, every position is filmed. You've got two choices to say, since each of those positions is going to be, in that case, would be perfectly still. You've got two choices, either to say it's the same bullet moving through time, which is what you're saying, and therefore is generated out of stillness, or you can stick to your experience, the all-important sort of grounding of science and hopefully philosophy, would show you that actually you don't ever see motion. You see a bullet, a bullet, a bullet. Now, are they the same bullet? Are they different bullets? The Buddhist says that every bullet is a new bullet. Every moment of reality is completely new. If anybody studied the French philosopher Deleuze, he comes to a lot of similar points as this, such as that one. So to sum up, what somebody like me, a Buddhist like me, would say, you believe there's motion just because you've been told, and just because you think you've seen motion through your whole life. But the bullet example with the infinite snapshots would show you that there is no motion. And if you reject that direct empirical experience you're having of the bullet's stillness, then you're just deluding yourself because of your past experience of thinking that there's motion. If you could see everything the way the infinite snapshot camera does, from the first moment of your life till now, you would not have a concept of motion, is the idea. Does that make sense? The article that I have on my website called Our Theory of Time that has a lot to do with some of that. So it's pretty readable, especially the conclusion. I thought I saw another hand up. Oh, okay, yeah.
So I follow this and I like it very much, but I just have a question. So, I mean, it's a bit like Hollywood or right. So when Hollywood make a movie,
it's still shots.
It's a good representation.
Yeah, philosophers use reality. That sometimes.
So what? Now if these moments, as I understand it, they come, they go, and let's forget time. It's just a sequence of, let's say, images. But
time doesn't exist on this scenario.
Why is there a sequence if we have no connection between them? So, in other words, why do we have a bullet here, a bullet there, and perhaps a bullet here? So, what connects?
Yeah. Why doesn't the bullet turn into a turtle?
If there is no connection, why is each moment as it comes from, let's say, energy or it just flashes in and out of existence, which I'm quite happy with. But what I still have the problem with, firstly, if we have a coherence in a thought, is that basically, do we generate the absurdity that the bullet is moving? Or how can we actually, do we have an influence in it? And why does the bullet not just appear in random positions, you know?
These are all, it's a very well thought out question, obviously. If this is what reality looks like, this is utterly random. Every Buddhist atom comes from nothing. So it comes from nothing. This I showed in that R Theory article. That's the Buddhist position also. That wasn't held by all Buddhists in the era I'm thinking of, which was pre-classical, late pre-classical India. But it definitely was held, and I show in that article that it appears to be it's definitely the best position. So that would be analogous to, if you're looking at virtual particles, quote, looking at, unquote, virtual particles in your physics lab. They just come up, where do they come from? What caused them? It seems that causation and, generation aren't the best description. Utter randomness is. So then your question is, why does my camera have a bullet here, 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 here? The answer to that question would, of course, be found if you could answer this question: how does consciousness exist? That's one of the ultimate mysteries in academia today. As far as I know, nobody really has a clue. There are good theorization and good research going on, but it's a huge mystery. So how does consciousness exist? And secondly, how does it construct images that have a rhythm, have predictability? All of Division 2 is the domain of empirical science. It has causation. Causation is describable in terms of absurdity. But nevertheless, causation is if you're a human living, spontaneously finding yourself in Division 2 reality, as we all have, why are there rhythms? When I set my alarm clock at 10 at night, why does it go off at 6 a.m.? When I shoot the bullet, why doesn't it fly that way or turn into a turtle or something? That would be the key to that is found in how consciousness constructs reality. If you can find out one, you find the other, I would think, which I wouldn't be able to do, unfortunately. If you develop your mind sufficiently, you would see that this is what you'd see in this room. And you would see that the surfaces and colors of empirical reality are this sort of residue that is insignificant, which that has to do with Buddhist ethics, which I'm going to go into in a couple minutes. But yeah, you would, this becomes all important. And every single person in this room is identical to this. And if you don't see that, it's just because you haven't taken the correct measures to understand nirvanic empiricism. Does that make sense? That was a really good question. So what hand do we have in it? I don't know. Do we fully construct consciousness? A lot of you want to say, Bohr's physics would imply that. I have no opinion on that at all. Because definitely. That's a very controversial issue. Or do the moments of consciousness just happen to us out of our control? That's probably the position I personally hold. That's a very Buddhistic position, where control is to be let go. Reality happens, and empirical reality is insignificant compared to ultimate reality. Yeah?
So, are you familiar with the correspondence principle?
A little bit.
Okay, so it's the idea.
Maybe give me a
for
one
anyone
sentence.
else, and for anyone else that may not be involved with quantum very much, it's just the idea that if quantum mechanics is supposed to be right, then as in the limit that things built of quantum particles or
quantum
whatever
stuff
become very large, they have to mathematically agree with the things that we see on the macro scale, like if I throw a ball, then it has to obey the trajectories, by Newton's laws,
but
that sort of thing.
We're pretty far from that, though.
That's true, yeah. And so actually what I was just wondering if you could comment at all about, is there anything like a correspondence principle involved in this?
No,
in Buddhist atomism,
it would be an anti-correspondence.
An anti-correspondence.
Yeah, it would be, there's a specific move to reject time, space, and matter. And there's a quote that I actually put on the Wikipedia site under Buddhist atomism, under the philosophy of presentism. Is from Trubetsky. It says that time does not exist. There's only the irreducible moment. So that's just one example. Space, time. So anti-correspondence would be the philosophy there. It's specifically called mereological nihilism. It's as if everything, that means that things with parts don't exist. So notice that Division 2 over here, one of its issues is that they're composite items. Actually, everything follows from that. That's a key Indian Buddhist principle, that composite items don't exist. And the whole philosophy of Buddhist atomism comes from that, right there.
And yet, if we, how do we explain measurables then? Like if I measure my mass and someone, or if I measure a bowling ball, and you measure a bowling ball, and someone else measures a bowling ball all on different scales all around the world, and we come up with the same number.
Yeah, right. According to the Buddhist position, so measurement here up is just conscious generation. So not only do we construct consciousness, but it appears to be, if you're real, you're outside me. I believe you're real. So let's assume you are. That's the whole matrix thing. Is the outside? Are we dreaming it, or are you really there? So let's assume that you are. So why do we come up with the same? I got the bowling ball to weigh that, and so did you. So that would just be similar to Jim's question. When we construct consciousness, why do we do it in similar ways? Why are there rhythms? Why do we do it in similar ways? The Buddhist says we don't really care. All we know is that this is construction of consciousness, and this is the domain of absurdity, and also things like dukkha, or suffering. And down here, now measurement down here is radically different, of course. Measurement down there is sort of your consciousness. Do we have a choice in creating realities? So measurement down here involves quantum uncertainty, at least or some kinds of quantum uncertainty, that is, where you can't measure something without participating in its existence. So it's a totally different. When we measure the bowling ball in Division 2, so I guess bowling ball measurement would be kind of, if there was another arrow here, it said middle order solids. You'd be measuring something there. So you believe that you're here at a distance from it, and your measurement doesn't disturb the bowling ball. You just measure it as it is. Down here, that's impossible. You only measure things by having some sort of, you disturb the system, and therefore participate in the system.
But at the same time, we all have the same quantitative perception, which
what do you mean quantitative perception?
Well, if it's a number,
okay.
We all come up with a way to say this is the same perception. If we can all verify that we all have the same.
Oh, sure.
What I think you call the distortion of reality. If we all have the same distortion of reality, does that mean that our consciousness then does it transcend these atoms, or is it an underlying principle that connects them, or is it?
Well, transcend is a good word. I know transcendence is often used, in religious circles, but we of course don't have to use it in that way here. The issue, it appears to be, would have to do with when observers, this is what we are according on the Buddhist position, are not nirvanic. They are therefore here, and they construct the illusion. They generate conscious distortion, good word, in similar ways for some reason. And that's a big, that's the mystery tied into what Jim's question was. Does that make sense? That was a good question. Yeah.
So the difficulty I have is this, that for something not to exist, there has to be an observer.
Yeah, when I say not exist, that is, I think I know where you're going here, or at least there's one thing to say quick. Not exist means exists in the mind only. The reason I do that, that's probably a crude, it's not precise enough way to put it, but I do that just because I'm used to that, seeing Buddhists do that. They'll say, if something has mind-only existence in this fashion, we say it doesn't exist. If something has mind-only existence in this fashion, we say it does exist.
So who's observing that lower existence?
Every single person, every single sentient being is. It's just the thing is not everybody knows it. You are right now nirvanic. Everybody is. It's just that most people haven't taken the steps to see this. Every single person in here could be a nirvanic empiricist empiricist in 5 seconds. And then after 5 seconds, you see that time doesn't exist. But the thing is that it's rarely done. This is the discussion I'm giving is, I just said I won't talk about Japanese Buddhism, but the discussion I'm giving, Indian Buddhists talk about it this way, but I'm also using Tendai Buddhism, which is from Japan. They often talk about active and passive enlightenment, where everybody is enlightened, it's just most people are not actively enlightened. They just don't know it. So, to put it in simpler words, doing meditation equals nirvanic empiricism. Most people don't do that. So.
The difficulty is, though, that these very persons who are doing this meditation don't exist, because these very persons are to be determined by precisely that.
Yeah, I'm talking about persons and so forth. Strictly speaking, there is no self or personhood in Buddhism. I just use that word just to, I can't come in here and, you have to talk about some familiarity, giving a lecture like this. Buddhism is so foreign to typical thinking and typical philosophy and religion, but not science. It's the same reason that quantum physicists have such trouble describing their work is the same reason that Buddhists have such trouble Indian Buddhists have such trouble describing their philosophy. Of course, Zen Buddhists just don't. They just said, we're not going to discuss our work. Instead, we're going to throw a pie at you or cut a cat in half or cut off our own arm or something. If you think that's funny, just go read the Zen Buddhist literature and you'll see what I mean. Those are actually real accounts I've given you from Zen Buddhism. I was going to say something else, but I forgot, so I interrupted you. You were going to...
No, I think, there's this eternal problem of even if you would agree, I would agree just intuitively, which doesn't mean a damn thing, but that first there's consciousness, and then, if there's anything to evolution, it's the materiality getting closer and closer to accessing that pre-existing consciousness. Mm-hmm. But for all these models, whatever they are, they're always lurking in the background of the idea of somebody observing this, or you can't state it, or something observing this, or you can't state it. That's the eternal problem, isn't it? That even if you talk about a field of consciousness, it presupposes an awareness of that field of consciousness.
Not on this position. Now, you didn't bring up God, but to have a universe and then there's, another observer outside of it, and then who's observing God, that is, I would think, undercut by Buddhists because they would just merely say that Buddhist atoms equal self-consciousness, where self-consciousness sort of is the end of the game because there is no, if something is observing itself, it's just like a loop. To make a yin-yang sort of, that's of course not what the yin-yang is all about. But you never get out of the loop if you're self-conscious. Now, of course, that's very popular in Advaita Vedanta Hinduism also, with the, quote, disinterested witness, unquote, where reality is held to be equal to self-consciousness. So that's the whole, Buddhist meditation, just put it really crudely, is just an ultra-engaged science of consciousness, which is, actually, I could go into that actually a little bit. Well, I don't know. Anyway, the example I was going to give you is it's not it's sort of like becoming a scientist about your own mental states equals Buddhist meditation, but not a casual scientist. You're truly embraced in the study. Sort of like the way Jane Goodall was truly, every moment of her awareness seems to be dedicated to hyper-focused on the chimps. That would be like if you, a Buddhist science of consciousness, if you practice that moment to moment, you would become a nirvanic empiricist. Of course, there are techniques on how to do it and books everywhere, lots of great books. But to truly get there is, for some reason, not as common as you'd think because it's a very simple process. The mind can only look in a few ways. You can look at either this stuff, or you can close your eyes and look at your own subjective world. If you do that in a truly sort of scientific way where you don't try to disturb the system, your inner world, when you look at it, but passively look at it in the way, Jane Goodall would look at the chimps in a scientific way, your subjectivity will metamorphosize into this. In other words, you will find out that your subjectivity equals this, which you didn't know before. Yeah? Oh, okay.
It's normally an hour, apparently at lunch.
Oh, no, tell me what I need to do. 5 minutes for...
Time doesn't really exist.
Yeah, right. Well, if we're in Division 2, we can talk about all these absurdities like time and motion and so forth. Well, what should I do with 5 minutes? I had 33 pages and we're on page 3. So, we can do, I had all kinds of things to do with social ethics and, does anybody have, so let's make this democratic. What does anybody want to talk about?
Maybe, I'd like to talk, if you could talk about meditation.
Okay.
I mean, it's meditation, I meditate, and
Oh, yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah, to talk about meditation, so I meditate, and at first, you probably know the processes. It's like hippie trippy. Stage 2, it's nasty and uncomfortable. And, there comes a point also when I meditate a long time, and I've been in the Zen, in Japan monastery. There comes also a point where, let's say, there's nothing. I mean, it's not even special, you see.
Not special, or
well,
what do you mean by nothing? Because I hear that, I hear emptiness, nothingness, void.
Let's say I have it's basically, there's one stage of meditation I have where there's nothing. There's no consciousness and there's no nothing. There's nothing. There's basically, it's just actually, in a way, controlling the mind, controlling the conscious mind to switch off. And it doesn't have any, the fun it has at the beginning is all gone, and the pain it has when you go through the painful part of meditation is gone. And I just wonder, of course, this flashing picture, energy and existence. I love it and I follow it, but why? What does the meditation do? Let us say, what does it? Does it connects you just at that atomic level? Would you say that?
Not,
or I should say, my perception of being a person, right?
It would seem to me that I don't know what the word nothingness means or what the word void means. I know what Buddhists mean by emptiness. They mean non-persistence. I think in a lot of books in the West, in the Western interpretations of Buddhism, nothingness and emptiness, just to repeat, I don't know what anybody's talking about. I just follow the specific trend school of Buddhism, whatever school means, that I referred to, whereas if you practicing a certain mindfulness meditation equals nirvanic empiricism, and there's a second equal sign, which equals this. So you are this. That's the only way I know how to explain it. That's meditation. Meditation is it's death. As I'm sure that you know, it's the death of surfaces and colors. It's the death of bodies, and it is it's very frightening. And it's only done under certain circumstances. I mean, my guess is that Buddhism is not more popular in our culture because our culture does not have, at least for, say, upper classes and certain privileged peoples, does not have enough pain and suffering to provoke people to want to escape their empirical Division 2, Div 2 reality. Whereas in, the history of India, you did have millions of people whose life was quite less than fun. So it's not surprising that Buddhism flourished there. So, I mean, if we have, our country is sort of on a bad trend right now. There's many instances of many ways you could show that our country is a tyrannical state, not a democratic state in any way. I mean, just one example is, if the people control the country, why is the government acting against our wishes? People don't have power. If people don't have power, government does. That equals tyranny. So, I mean, if, say, this trend continued and things got savage enough here in our country, which I don't know if that'll happen or not, hopefully not, the prediction would be Buddhism would be on the rise, say. So, yeah.
How would you explain to a scientist empirically reincarnation?
Yeah, that is one that continually stumps me, especially in that the early Buddhists, a lot of early Buddhists, were big reincarnation advocates. If there's no self, what's, jumping from body to body? If there's no body, what's the self that doesn't even exist in the first place jumping around into? I would have, all I could say really is that, if I'm here now, whatever I means, or here means, or now means that, but anyway, it, of course, leads to the possibility that, I was at another place, or will be at another one later. Whether that, who knows if I was Cleopatra, or if I'm going to go to Christian heaven, or whatever. I really don't have anything to say about that, because I absolutely don't understand any of it.
And can you tell us how you feel about Tibetan Buddhism?
Tibetan Buddhism is probably my favorite tradition.
And why is that?
Well, because Tibetan Buddhism and the Indian Buddhist tradition I'm referring to were like this through history. They basically became one tradition. So when I refer to Indian Buddhism, as I have today, I probably should have been referring to, and it's Tibetan offshoots also, which are discussed in the book I mentioned a little while ago, Dreyfus's book, Recognizing Reality. That's the best account I know, but there are many good accounts. So yeah, Tibetan Buddhism would be, the Dalai Lama, I think, has said that his admiration for science, if science says something and it conflicts with Buddhists, we're wrong, he says. That means Buddhists are wrong, he says. Of course, the whole point of my talk today is to show him that, actually, quantum theory, the sort of ultimate science and Buddhism are completely in alignment. So, anyway, that would be my quick take.
So if you remove yourself from the esoteric thought that you were discussing for the past hour and a half and look at the way Tibetan Buddhists have created this incredibly intricate ritualistic culture, how could you see the Western society relating to that?
Now I'll just say that is definitely not my area of expertise. The cultural aspects of Tibetan Buddhism there could be people in this room that definitely know more about that than me, because I'm specifically Buddhist philosophy. But as far as I can understand,
can I stop you there?
Yeah.
How could you possibly, no matter what philosophy you ascribe to, separate culture and the human condition that manifests that culture from the spiritual practice? Whatever it may be, whether it's Catholicism or Zen Buddhism or Islam.
If I imply that I am, I don't mean to. I mean to say that the philosophy that we've described here is going to, show up in certain cultures because of the culture only, really.
So let me rephrase this then. If you have a philosophical way of thinking, eventually it will manifest into a very materialistic realm that we reside in and a specific cultural form. So the thoughts that you have taken, you have abstracted from the culture and the human condition of the people, whether they're the Indians who you say suffered and therefore this religion came out, which, by the way, I have major questions about, or Tibetan Buddhism that you say you definitely like, but you don't really know about the culture.
Right.
I find that disconnect to be really problematic.
Okay, yeah, I would agree that it is. All I could say is I agree. My specific interest is Buddhism and quantum mechanics. It has been for several years. And just taking a basic understanding that Buddhism and quantum mechanics are cultural movements and are generated by cultures has been good enough for me. To study exactly why Buddhist atomism came out of this era of Tibet and this era of China, India, but didn't come out of medieval Europe, has just not been an interest of mine. It could have.
But even currently, I mean, if you let's look at quantum physics, right? And the physicists who have come up with this theory. It's very much connected to the contemporary situation and context that they live in. And if you look at the current situation with Tibetan Buddhism and China, it is highly political. I mean, very much in the world political.
Well, physics is highly political, too, as I said earlier.
That's what I'm alluding to. So the context, I'm not talking necessarily about the history.
Okay.
But you're saying, we're here, we're now, we're flickering beings in the now. And I say, yeah, but we're also flickering beings in the material realm that have manifested a very complex, troubling, disturbed world that is a reflection of a disturbed mind.
Yeah.
And that
I had a lot to
disturbed
say about
mind
that,
has evolved into a specific cultural manifestation that you have to analyze if you're going to look at consciousness and how we can evolve to the next level.
Well, that actually is, I had quite a bit to say about corporate and governmental psychopathology and dictatorship in the world, and how Buddhism is a specific antidote, because Buddhism generates compassion, whereas going to the mall and so forth doesn't. But
that's also your cultural definition, because if I go to...
I do have a very well worked out, as far as what I just said about generating compassion, I have a well worked out model for why that's the case.
I mean, it may be that in the long view of history, the corporate structure makes sense, and even the wars that are nonsensical and awful to us, maybe there's a reason.
I didn't say there's anything wrong with corporate or governmental tyranny. I just said that I just was going to discuss.
So you're calling it tyranny.
But why does that mean I'm putting a value judgment on it? The culture, driven by endless speeches by George Bush, with freedom and tyranny, or the 20 times those are mentioned in the first 2 paragraphs of any speech he gives. So, I mean, we have this, not saying you, but people may have a automatic reaction. If I say tyranny, they have all these associations, but of course there have been tyrannies that have existed that have been just great, such as with Paracelsus in ancient Greece. The point is that, if we live in a corporate or governmental tyranny now, does that hurt people or not? That's all I meant by that.
I mean, it's a total, your definition is a cultural construct. In other words, I can, as a Westerner, as a Western woman living in today, walking into a Zen monastery that is completely male and they're slamming each other, I could call that very foreign and tyrannical, not exactly compassionate.
Oh, sure.
So the
right.
So the definitions are, to me, a big problem in these esoteric philosophical elaborations is that you can very quickly enter into this realm that says, I'm nothing, this is all an illusion, we're not really here, we're all flickering, It's such a great device for manipulation of other people and for having a...
But what if science and philosophic rigor could give some evidence that it's true?
I think science is really important.
Yeah,
I think because it's rooted in the realm we live in. It's got other issues, but I think it's got answers. It's the place where we reside.
Yeah, right.
I mean, in our
I just hold science as being basically all important, and I demote philosophy as being a servant to it, personally, if that matters. I mean, just what you were saying earlier, I mean, I'm going to be the first one to just obviously agree that this is all cultural business. I have no disagreement. And your criticism of me saying that you have not discussed culture enough today, I would say I would agree, is a good criticism. So that's it. Just kidding.
So, Jeff, I'd like to thank you very much. And
you're welcome.
I learned a lot and really enjoyed it.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.